Good afternoon, everyone, once again. On behalf of Yardstick, I welcome our distinguished panelists, educators joining us from India, Middle East, and rest of the world. I also welcome those who are joining us through a YouTube stream. So in today's webinar, we will try to address a key question, which is currently around the education industry in schools. Should kids learn coding? While coding is a buzzword around in the education industry, we look into the practical aspects and reality in including coding as an integral part of the school's core curriculum. My name is Deepal, and I'm the CEO of Yardstick. Um, just to brief you about Yardstick, we are a 14-year-old organization which specializes in STEM and computer science education. And we work with more than 500 schools in US, UK, Middle East, and India. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our panelists today. Ram, if you could move the slide. Yeah. Dr. Biswajit Saha. Dr. Saha is the Director of Training and Skill Education in CBSE, New Delhi. Dr. Saha handled the execution of various development projects of World Bank, AICTE, and UGC. He drives promotion of future skills in schools along with industry association and oversees the digital education movement under Vidyadan at Diksha. Dr. Saha is a member of various national and international committees constituted by AICTE, State Higher Education Council, DGT, NCTE, MOE, and MSDE. Our next panelist is Dr. Maria Charles. Is the National Secretary for Education Culture at Catholic Bishops' Conference of India. Dr. Maria is the National Secretary for the Office for Education Culture. He has associated with All India Don Bosco Education Society for 12 years. He has masters in social work and mass media and journalism, and a doctorate in development communication from Salesian University in Rome. He has presented papers in national and international seminars in the US, Philippines, Italy, Spain, Singapore, and Sri Lanka. Our next panelist, Mr. Roshan Gandhi, is the Chief Executive Officer of City Montessori Schools, Lucknow. City Montessori School is the world's largest city school with more than 57,000 students across 18 campuses in Lucknow. Mr. Gandhi is empowering CMS 4,500 strong educational team to deliver a bold new vision for quality skills-based education at scale. A graduate from University of Oxford with an MBA in Education Leadership from University College of London, he's currently pursuing a PhD in Education Leadership at UCL. And our last panelist, Mr. Chris Green. Chris is a former education advisor to KHD in Dubai and has led a range of leadership and improvement projects in the USA, China, and Bahrain. Prior to directing School Review in Bahrain, he was the Chief Executive of Education Leadership and Management Solutions, a network involved in large-scale review and improvement projects for private companies, regional clusters, and government-affiliated agencies in many parts of the world. I would also like to thank our sponsor for today's webinar, Qubits. Qubits is a future-ready computer science curriculum developed keeping in mind the needs for 21st century learners to be literate, as well as developing the computational thinking skills which are relevant for their future. Qubits provides various tools such as teacher guides, student workbooks, integrated online platform, and an assessment system for computer science learning. In today's webinar, Ram, if you could move forward. Yeah. Today's webinar, we will be addressing some key areas concerning the implementation of coding and computer science curriculum in schools. We'll be trying to address some key questions such as, is coding for everyone? How does coding curriculum help students to develop skills as well as improving the career prospects? Will the introduction of coding overload the existing curriculum? Are the teachers prepared for implementing the latest changes in CS curriculum, or they need to be better prepared? In today's webinar, first, the panelists will be speaking for 10 to 15 minutes each, presenting their perspective on these key areas. And we would have a Q&A session at the end where the participants can post your questions, and the panelists will try to answer those questions. You can find a Q&A button right at the bottom of the screen. where you can post your questions all across the discussion. And the questions will be answered at the end of the panel discussion. And if there are any unanswered questions, we will be, of course, trying to answer them in the further follow-up emails that we'll send it across to you. Thank you, everyone, once again for joining us. I pass it on to Dr. Biswajit Saha for his presentation on the Should Kids Learn Coding. Over to you, Dr. Saha.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. It's a good opportunity to discuss on these specific subjects, because worldwide there are a lot of controversy one way, whether coding in school is really required or not, or even in the school level, college level. So everywhere this discussion is on. But I think some way our country's new education policy has really put these confusions or controversy down by putting the mandatory requirement of coding. And that too also from the school level. Now, pros and cons we can discuss, because when educationists are there, all eminent educationists are there in the panel, and also our viewers, they are also actually real-time educationists who are managing the school, college, or entire gamut of where, rather the question is also coming from their end. So at this point of time, now, believe me, coding versus computer programming language learning, if you see the dynamics in that way, then my answer is also no. But it is, education policy is actually trying not to decode this narrative in that manner. So for every individuals who are sitting in this webinar, I think some way or others, we are driving a problem-solving ability, and that innate abilities are already there with our kid. Now, instead of coding, let me tell it's a computational thinking. Now, it's an approach of problem solving. Now, naturally, when we are introducing this kind of jargon to the school goers, then they may feel initially where there is a gap of language, because most of the time, English-led programming language is a matter of confusions for the vernacular medium. Whether considering this analogy, the coding is appropriate, I think we need to discuss. So, but here, as a board representative, we are presenting a different perspective altogether. Your thinking ability is always mined with your own language of presentations, your mother tongue. Now, nobody restricts to things with your own language. Now then, the coding is absolutely possible, because your brain is thinking in terms of computational thinking, and rather your brain is supercomputer. And if that ability we can infuse as early as possible, I think our children will be more ready, more focused to solve any kind of 21st century. So coding is a kind of new literacy altogether, which our teacher must be convinced upon. It is not that the computer science teacher is going to introduce coding in the class. For us, every teacher, whether social science, maths, or language teacher, everybody can introduce coding in the class. So that is the beauty. In the thinking dimensions, the gamifications, so that children of early age can quickly pick up the complex technical task We are naming is a technical, but in reality, any neighborhood problem can be considered as a project. And with respect to age, how they are viewing that particular problem over a period of 5 years, can we have a mechanisms to look into the child perspective and some strain measuring instrument so that his understanding on the problem and his solution with respect to so-called coding, how far we have achieved. I think if that dimensions can be spelled properly in the early years, your primary coding literacy is done. The second argument is with reference to future job market. Now, that's why initially I was hesitant. If it is related to programming language, I am sure by the time the children will complete their UG program from leading university, those programming language will be outdated in the job market. But whether the organization aiming to recruit based on his or her programming skill or his or her analytical or problem solving skill, that matters. I think the different literature which are available, whether it is OECD side or related to the future job market or future of education, everywhere these arguments are being discussed by different educationists in different platforms, and different perspectives are already there in the domain. Now, considering the future job market requirement, whether it is innovation or entrepreneurial activity, there also, I strongly believe, without algorithmic problem-solving interventions, the success may not be appropriately viewed by any individual. So, how we can enhance that skill? For that, I think the frustrations can quickly build as if you find yourself constantly walking down to a dead end. I think our children need to see this kind of walking journey in their school. It is not that the structured approach, whatever the international board or CBSE affiliated schools abroad or India is fundamentally aiming them to prepare to write the entrance board conducted examinations or so-called joint entrance examinations for entering to the higher education system. I think we are categorically suppressing their problem-solving skill over a period of time, and that is not less than 15 to 20 years. Because if you take these early years of schooling to till 10 plus 2, it's approximately 15 years. They are retaining in your campus, but outcome is maybe it's a high sounding 95% marks or other things. So my request by means of this requirement of coding, whether we can instill the perseverance, and of course there is a requirement, let me pause because time limit as Mr. Paul has given to me, that how we can enhance their linguistic ability, presentation skill, there also coding is required. Now, how to learn coding? For that different methodology, whether it is technology specific or computer science curriculum specific, that is $1 million question. Now that perspective, maybe in our engineering time, we started with basic, ended with CPP or so-called Visual Basics and all, Java. But here, the Python or students' problem-solving ability, they starts with the scratch and literally stop at Python programmings and other analytical ability they develop. So those issues need to be thoroughly discussed, and customized as per the requirement of the class or individual. So it could be PR or adaptive learning strategy in coding also can be strategized. Let me pause here, Paul, because otherwise the discussions will, it won't be a panel discussion. Sorry.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Saha, sharing your perspective, looking at coding, not just as a process of learning programming languages, but on a much better aspect in terms of developing, various skills for students through various means, which eventually, without which children cannot survive, for their future, which is quite unknown to everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Saha. I move on to Dr. Maria Charles to share your thoughts on the same subject, this domain, coding and computer science, as a part of school curriculum. Over to you, Dr. Maria. Ram, if you could share Dr. Maria's presentation. Dr. Maria, you are muted. You need to unmute.
Can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ashish, and thank you, Dipal, for your invitation to join in. And I was very interestingly listening to Dr. Biswajit Saha and his perspective, especially being in that position and trying to push forward a progressive idea like coding into the schooling system is very much appreciated because as like so many others, I'm also new to coding. Okay, I'm new to coding, and I just wanted to reflect a little as a beginner and as well as a person who is coordinating with so many schools on how and why we should let kids learn coding. Okay, please go on. Now, for example, to the many participants who may not be well versed with what is coding, coding is basic literacy in the digital age. Okay, and it is important for kids to understand and be able to work with and understand the technology around them. And having children learn coding at a young age prepares them for the future, as Dr. Biswajit had rightly said. And it helps children with communication, creativity, maths, writing, confidence, etc. Okay, next. Yeah, I just wanted to give a little bit of this coding experience, how it is. So just like that, a few slides you will find here and there some type of images moving on, and that's how it is. Okay. So I just was reading through and trying to find out, and I talked to quite a few principals, teachers who have been teaching computer science, especially coding these years. And I talked to them. They told me, other than just about the subject itself, I asked them, why should children learn coding? Okay, that was my primary interest. And they gave me quite a lot of reasons. And I just put about 5 of them together, okay, and which I thought was very important. One is it strengthens the brain. Coding motivates your child to experiment with strengths, their brains, and helps them to tap into the creative side. And most of our the system of education that we have does not do this. It only helps one part of the brain to work, like studying it by heart and then producing it on the papers. And then, of course, the CBSE system has come out with little practicals and a lot of projects. But even then, our system is still lagging behind. So here is something that which can strengthen the brain. Second, it transforms from consumers to creators of technology. This is very important because we always think when we want to learn something, we look for an app, we look for software, we look for something, and we are always consumers. We look towards big companies which produces big software or some apps, and we think by using them we are very intelligent. Okay, but we have come to the next stage where the children learn coding, and coding empowers your child to create apps, websites, games, and makes the screen time productive. This is very important. So this is where we move from being consumers to creators. And the next one is it develops resilience and problem solving mindset, as Mr. Viswajit rightly had mentioned, and I would like to reiterate the same point that while coding comes debugging that motivates your child to work through challenges and come up with a solution. The learning process develops their problem solving skills. Step by step, the child learns to solve problems and it takes them to a greater and a bigger field. Yeah, next slide. It improves focus, it improves focus. And this is what is very much needed today, especially when people need to organize themselves and people need to, what do you call, organize their life today, because we are met with so many challenges, so many challenges. And for a student, this coding can help him or help her to improve focus by creating apps, websites, or games. It helps develop better focus and organization. The child learns early in life how to be focused. Otherwise, they will not end up in creating something holistic. And the last one is essential job skill for the future. And that was also already mentioned. But then a lot of people were saying that in 2030 job economy, there will be a high demand for coding skills. It will open up a plethora of career opportunities for your child, which includes app developer, web developer, computer programmer, web designer, game designer, UI, UX designer, to name a few. But there are so many other possibilities of every child entering into this huge market that is open. Okay. Now, having said this, there are a few other things that I would like to say. The amazing thing about coding is that anyone can learn them. Anyone can learn them at any age. Both paid and free online portals are available to learn and to teach coding today. Okay. So if you want to just pick up out of curiosity, you can go and you can find out. But if you like to seriously learn coding, you can also get into portals or get into web portals or apps that teach you how to code on a systematic basis, hourly basis, day by day, you can learn systematically. Even young kids can learn to use this computer language to create a poetry, game lab. Enormous options are available to learn coding. By the time a student passes K-12 studies, he or she can develop mobile apps, create web portal, design games, and it can lead to a computer programming applied in science, medicine, and other improving technology. Today, coding can be in every field, every field. So that is how, so which means it goes back to even the teachers who teach other subjects, not just computer science, need to learn coding because they can use this in order to also to learn their own subjects better. It can bring about a huge transformation in our daily life. And by way of any transaction and business institutions are organized today, and we already use a lot of apps, in order to transact, in order to save, or in order to invest. We do a lot of things. I'm sure coding will go a great way to help us in the future. Yes, next. Well, yes, this is what is also very important. Coding can improve academic performance. Okay, and it is very closely knit to mathematics. And so, a person who would like to learn mathematics and other subjects, I think just yes. Thank you. Okay. Coding teaches kids to visualize abstract concepts and helps them to real world situation. Okay. Now, STEAM also is very important today, and many schools have already opted for that. And the STEAM and coding program introduces students to basic electronics and coding through creative materials. Now, these projects are very open-ended projects are available to allow students to be creative while exploring technology and building their hands-on making and coding skills. Yes, next slide. Yes, and it helps build soft skills because all of us are looking for soft skills in students, and the government also is investing a lot in students learning soft skills because we know that in the job market today, any person who does not have a soft skill, just a degree wouldn't do in any way because he or she has to be employable. And it helps now the students to focus, use creativity, and build a lot of resilience. Okay, this is said. Career preparation. So this is also, for example, if somebody would like to move into animation, or if someone would like to move into science, or if someone would like to move into engineering. So this type of a coding can help in the tech industry very much. So at a young age, the person can also choose the subject and choose also to learn coding in that process and in that line. And today, if you go into some of the web portals, you will find there are over 180 million projects done by people or students who have learned coding, which are available. and in different fields, different variety of fields, they are all available. So which means all over the world, people, young people have started learning coding, and this is very, very important. And that's why in India, we shouldn't be lagging behind, or whoever is participating in this webinar will have to understand that your children, our children cannot be lagging behind. And it is important that these children start learning. And that's why the next question comes. What is the appropriate age to learn coding? Because quite a few parents were also saying, we don't want the child to lose his or her childhood. The child has to learn quite a lot of things, quite a lot of things. Like, for example, well, I'll come step by step. Now, for example, you have seen the present generation, which has learned to work with computers and mobile phones, and especially during this lockdown period, a lot of children had phones in their hand, and you know how they so quickly open an app or do quite a few audio and video editing, and for them to learn coding would be an easy language, because earlier probably the children would have to be introduced a lot, first of all, to computer technology, but now they have it, so coding would come a little easy for them. But one may worry about children immersed in the world of computer and forget basic interpersonal relationship skill and other life skills, which is also a question a lot of parents are asking, because we know that the children get hooked to these mobiles and hooked to these computers. So it may be good to start with the non-computer coding in the beginning when they are very small, and beginning with the children to group together things and how to play with other children. These are things that can be started. And also in rural areas, as well as in areas where places where the computer technology hasn't gone through, and online is still a little far-fetched idea for them, they can learn with a non-computer idea of coding, to start with. But then nowadays we find that more and more people have access to mobile, and it shouldn't be difficult for them to start learning a new language. Like we learn English, or we learn French, we learn German. This coding is a computer language which can be learned at a very early age. Yes. Next. It will be good for the parent to learn the basics of coding. That also is important, because to introduce to children an appropriate level of learning, because leaving everything to the children and wondering later, well, I really don't know what this coding is about, and I don't know what my child is up to. I think it is better to learn a little bit of coding. I'm only talking to the parents. And it is good to remember, as children learn to use mobile phones more creatively and easily than the adults, it also will be with the coding. You'll be amazed to see how many creative projects your children will be able to create at such an early age, from computational skills to problem solving skills. Okay, so so the parents need not be unnecessarily worried. That is my opinion. Yes, next. I think it's over. Next. Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Dipal, for giving this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Maria, for sharing your thoughts. Like you rightly said, it's really a tool for strengthening the brain. Like Steve Jobs puts it, the computer is a bicycle for the brain. It's sort of an exercise for the brain.
Yes,
most of the coding actually, and both the panelists mentioned, I believe coding creates a lot of opportunity for children to be problem solvers, which otherwise mostly our curriculum lacks opportunities for children to have their free thought, their creativity, their problem solving. And in many ways coding creates opportunity if implemented in the right way for the right age group, chances for them to be creative. Debugging, like Dr. Maria mentioned, is a great exercise for children to use their thought process, problem solving into action, and being creators rather than just consumers of technology. Thank you so much, Dr. Maria. We'll come back to you.
Yeah, sure.
Before we move to Mr. Gandhi, I would like to run two small polls just to understand our participants' perspectives on coding. So you'll see a small poll on the screen right now. Yeah, should coding be a part of the core curriculum? I request all the participants to share your thoughts. Yeah, another 10 seconds. Anybody else would like to participate in the poll? All right, thank you. So yeah, it looks like it's more one-sided. 97% of the participants think computer science or coding should be a core part of the curriculum. Yeah, I have one more small poll to run. What do you think is the right age for introducing coding in schools? Yeah, 1 minute. Thank you. So less than 4% thinks that coding should start before the age of 4. 39% of the participants think coding should start from age 5 to 8 years. And 44% thinks it should be between 9 years and 12 years. And 14% thinks it should be between 13 and 16 years. Thank you everyone for participating. Now I move on to Mr. Gandhi to share your thoughts on coding. Should kids learn coding?
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure hearing the thoughts of the previous speakers, and interesting to be following the poll that you just presented, because I feel that I might be fighting a losing battle. Seeing the 97% in favor, I might be about to express some opinions that are rather unpopular. If 97%. And the second question was a bit of a loaded question, because it said which age should it be introduced at. It didn't give the option of saying no age at all. So people had to pick an age, and I think most people lean towards the younger ages, whereas I picked the highest age if it has to be introduced. So coding, right? I think coding has become such a huge fad almost in terms of coding classes at the school level. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. And I think it is partly, as some of the speakers have said, it's driven by, of course, the changing needs of the job market, right? Tech is absolutely booming. We have unicorns coming up left, right, and center in finance tech and educational technology. The salary rates of tech people are going up and up and up every day. Tech companies are starting to give Harley Davidson motorcycles as joining bonuses to new programmers. It's a huge industry that's booming. Coding is becoming a very lucrative skill. It's a much needed skill, and it's seen as a skill which is almost fundamental, in the modern world. It's almost starting to be seen as a literacy. So, just as people need to learn to read and write, and then people needed to learn to use computers, now increasingly people are starting to perceive coding as a literacy, as an essential skill that's needed to survive and thrive in modern or in future workplaces. And I think, that assumption is coming from somewhere, but it needs to be questioned. I think the second reason for the boom in coding classes is actually the education technology companies and the kind of aggressive marketing that they've been doing. I mean, they have been absolutely brilliant and successful in marketing. They've pumped hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into marketing their products. And now whether, those specific products are good or not, whether people are adopting, I don't want to name names here, but whatever those products are, whether people are adopting them or not, is slightly beside the point, because just the act of putting out so much material and marketing news about coding has planted this notion of coding into the public perception. It's raised the profile and importance of coding in the minds of the general public. It's created this sense of FOMO, this fear of missing out, that, if I'm not giving my child coding classes, then, other children may get ahead of my child. And so that fear exists, that aggressive marketing has been very successful, and that's planted into everyone's mind. And it's even made its way into the new education policy, which has made the suggestion that coding classes ought to start from as early as class 6. Now, the reason why I'm keen to question all this is because coding it's a practical application-based skill that is needed in particular contexts. And it's a very valuable skill, and it's a very powerful skill. And if people want to learn coding, that's great, and they should absolutely be encouraged too. But to make it a core part of the curriculum, or to make it part of the day-to-day educational provision, is questionable. And I think that's because coding is a skill that when people have the foundation, when young people have the foundations in place in terms of their mental abilities and their thinking skills, they can learn the practicalities of coding fairly quickly, right? You can learn the basics of coding on a 6-month course. And increasingly at the higher education level, the direction of travel, the innovative direction of travel, is to get people away who want to go into coding, to get them away from 3-year degrees in computer science or in software engineering, and they can do a 6-month vocational program that will make them just as employable, if not more employable, as coders, as programmers in their environment. And I think the basics of coding. I mean, what is coding? It's logical flows. It's logic, and so when kids learn logic and when they learn reasoning, they get a sound basis that will enable them to learn coding later. So whether they want to do a short course on coding or go do a vocational course later on, or they join a coding job, they can learn on the go. And the beauty of coding is that it's such an evolving field. It's something which is moving all the time. There are new programming languages coming up all the time. A few years ago, .NET was all the rage, and everyone wanted to be a C# programmer. And then nowadays Python is the fashion, and Python is seen as a more efficient succinct programming language. So the specific details of how to code, people are having to relearn anyway. And if you're a class 6 student, I mean, you've got to get through classes 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, your university years. So you're talking about 9 or 10 years before you're actually getting into a job. So the coding skills that you would have learned in class 6 for a specific language, they may change by the time you get older. The fashions change, the new products come into the place. So the basic building blocks, the basic skills, they remain fundamentally the same, but those can be learned through other ways. And I'll come to the other ways in a minute. But when it comes to coding specifically, the other thing I wanted to say is that, people who do coding, the most successful coders don't memorize exactly all the different aspects of a programming language. They simply learn the basics, they gain experience on the job, and they look a lot up. So, testing coding, for example, in a closed environment is slightly irrelevant skill, because when you're actually coding in a job, you can constantly Google, information on how to add things into your code. There are these great forums where, coders from all around the world are constantly communicating, providing information to each other about how to code, about how to improve their coding skills. You can lift bits of code and insert it elsewhere. And in that manner, people learn on the go and people can explore. So, if you want to develop good coders, you don't need to teach them the nuts and bolts of a programming language at a young age. You need to teach them logical reasoning, and you need to teach them the ability to apply their thinking and to explore and to learn things on the go and to gain experience and to explore bits of code. And I think with that in mind, skills-based education is increasingly a buzzword, and it ought to be a priority across the education sector. And we must analyze what that really means. Does it mean specific vocational skills, or does it mean skills that are applicable across vocations and across different subjects and different job markets? And I think those skills are what we need to focus on in schools. And those aren't learned by introducing yet another thing into the syllabus, yet another set of coding classes. Those are learned by changing our methodologies of education. So the kinds of skills that we're talking about, one could call them the 4 C's, critical thinking, collaboration, communication, creativity. These skills are learned not by introducing new subjects, but by changing the methodology from which we teach existing subjects. Right? So mathematics education, for example, children will do hundreds and hundreds of maths exercises to sort of memorize ways of producing answers to math problems, and they don't learn with understanding. Can we get children to learn with understanding? Can we get children to engage with the logical proofs behind the mathematical concepts? Can we get children to undertake projects in maths? All of these things are building transferable, applicable skills, including logical reasoning skills, that are a foundational base for children to learn anything else in the future, including coding. So I think cluttering up our curriculums by adding in new subjects at a young stage is questionable. It's ill-advisable when we've already got a situation where there are too much syllabus content, too much curriculum content that we're trying to impart to our kids. Trying to cram more into that curriculum will be detrimental. More important is to reduce the scope of curriculum, not increase it. Create space and time in existing classrooms to teach with understanding, to teach with skills, to teach with the 6 C skills or the 4 C skills or whatever you want to call them, and to build that base from which students can go ahead and learn anything, including coding. And that will set them up perfectly well for the future. So coming back to the very first point I made, that there's this fear that in the future coding is going to be an essential skill, that kids are not going to be able to thrive in the job market if they don't know how to code. Actually, that's not true. Essential skills are those skills which are essentially human, which are transferable, which computers cannot replicate, which are creative, which are communicative. Those are the essential skills that will hold children in good stead in their future careers, not specific vocational skills that can be learned later, that can be learned on the job, that can be learned through short courses. So that's my pitch, and I hope that's not too unpopular a pitch, considering the 97% view that would disagree with me, or maybe I would have changed the mind of some of those 97%. We shall see.
Thanks, Mr. Gandhi. And I know it's tough to be, part of the 3%, fighting against the 97%. I think you had a very powerful argument here that, coding, when you look at coding, a lot of skills that can be developed through coding can even otherwise be developed as well, with the changes, modifications of the curriculum, ensuring that the existing curriculum gives them those opportunities that coding provides, such as, free thinking, problem solving, creating new material from the existing stuff. So yeah, that also equally gives that opportunity. And Mr. Gandhi, for you, I will rerun that poll at the end of this panel discussion to see if anybody has changed their minds. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's good to have the other end of the perspective also to make this panel discussion more fulfilling. Thank you for your inputs. Now I pass it on to Mr. Green.
It's good to meet to everybody. It's good morning from where I am in the world. So I know you're later in the day. This is a real honour, Paul, to be joining such a distinguished group on the panel. Really enjoyed the 3 contributions so far, and I don't think Mr. Roshan is so far at loggerheads with the first 2 speakers, nor with me. But I have to say, I was in the 97% of core curriculum. I was also in the 4% of which was started at a very, very young age, when children were around 4 or 5 in nursery and kindergarten. So we're at different ends of the what the Dr. Sahar called it, the algorithmic problem-solving spectrum. But I think we probably have differences in definition, and if we sort out those differences in definition, we become much closer to the same agenda. I'm amazed actually how my slides, I've only got 4 very heavy word slides, but how much I've predicted I wanted to say in this seminar matches what's already been said by the other speakers. And I've got real empathy with all the things that have been said about coding being a new language. It's a linguistic skill. It's a problem-solving activity. It's about shifting mindsets towards inquiry and problem-solving. For me, if we just go to my first slide, I think the issue of computer science in the curriculum and coding in the curriculum is actually a small part of a much bigger debate. And that much bigger debate is about what do we include in the curriculum. And it's happening not just in India with the new education policy, it's happening all over the world. And I work in many places, I just did in my introduction. But if you look at GCSE and A-level in the UK, CBSE, ICSE in India, when we look at North America, common curriculum and international baccalaureate, there's real soul searching going on about what should be in the curriculum. And it's not just about what should be taught, it's also very much about how it should be taught, which I think Mr. Roshan was kind of alluding to in his final remarks. We need to ask questions about how we teach these things, and the way we move into decisions about how we teach these things. What should we be doing with young children? And I thought that both Dr. Sahar and Dr. Maria Charles, they both alluded to the sort of the ethical sensitivities around how much time do we want to put children in front of the computer screen. And sure enough, Mr. Roshan talks about, or actually it was Dr. Charles talks about not having a coding linked necessarily to a computer screen. There are lots and lots of things we can do which are around logical reasoning, which don't actually require students to be in front of a computer. So I think the moral thinking and the ethical sensitivities around what we do with the curriculum is very appropriate when we start thinking about coding and students in school. But the big one for me is how we shift mindsets towards building an inclusive learning culture, which isn't just down this traditional path of we have a timetable, we have 12 subjects, we give them 40 minutes each if we're lucky, we have specialist teachers coming in and preaching at the front and hoping that they learn something. And I think the kind of debate we're having this morning is exciting, it's foresighted, it's uplifting, but I think if we moved into classrooms, we'd see something that represents something more like 1870 in London. You know, we're about 150 years off the pace in terms of many of our classrooms, and yet the debate about curriculum development and pedagogical leadership, which is what Dr. Sahar has written extensively about and very beautifully, I think the gap between what we're saying should be happening at the theoretical level is a long way short of where we should be in terms of practice in classrooms. So if we move on, my point really, my case really is that we've failed to shift away from the traditional teaching mode and moved into a mode which is securing good learning through inquiry and problem solving. And I picked this up from Andres Lechner. He was in a lecture in Dubai some while ago, about just before lockdown actually. And he said this, now this guy's in charge of PISA in the OECD. So, I mean, he's like right in the middle of measurement and all these things and endless additions to the curriculum and PISA and TIMS and all that lot. And he said, it's very easy to add stuff to the curriculum. Everybody will be your friend. But that way we get a mile-wide curriculum. Successful education is about learning fewer things at greater depth. There's a mismatch between the design of our systems and the aspirations of the curriculum. In my experience, that is so true. And now if we just come to the poll you've just conducted, the poll, you know, 97% of us want computer science chucked in the core, as if we haven't got enough already, listening to Mr. Roshan. And I was a part of that vote. And I was a part of the minority who said, let's start it when they're very, very young. And that's to do, I think, with of the 117 people, 114 people who voted, I think most of those are somewhere else in this continuum about how education in classrooms should be changing, how education in schools should be changing. We need this transformation that we're all talking about, but we need to do it intelligently. And that's about asking some real core questions, some real deep questions about what we should be doing as we open up after the lockdown. The lockdown's given us a chance to reflect on things and see things differently. And I think that's where we should be. So fewer things at greater depth. That's my next slide. My first point is, are decision makers near enough to effective pedagogical leadership? I mean, my hypothesis would be they are not. Okay, they are not. The people who make decisions, who make the calls for us, are not near schools and classrooms. They're often removed, they're often politically driven, they have other stakeholders' interests at heart rather than the students in schools. We've seen over the years, over the past 20 years, 25 years, we've seen a shift towards managerialism and the growth of education industries, marketing, as Mr. Roshan described it. We are inundated with people selling us things. We have far, far too many tests and examinations in the school curriculum. I go in to try and help schools transform, do new things, bring things forward. They'll often say to me, oh, for the next 3 weeks, we're doing curriculum tests. For whatever curriculum board they're following. And then when they've done those tests, they've got internal tests just to see what they can do for assessment for learning. And then there's older age groups, they've got public examinations, which they want to do well in because their schools will be league tables to see how they are in the relative ranking of things. So I think there's a huge industry that promotes the kind of thing that our three earlier speakers have been describing. We are thwarted away from doing the right things because of this thrust from the commercial world. My second point here is about are school leaders adequately prepared to guide and support teachers in evolving teaching and learning processes, which would include things like coding. Well, there are lots of movements around. In India, for example, there's a new education policy. We've got the pedagogical pedagogical leadership course being run and rolled out across India and across the Middle East for CBSE schools. I mean, people are trying to do something about preparing school leaders to be closer to pedagogy. I mean, we all know we can go into schools and we find principals and vice principals who are nowhere near the pedagogy. They're near other things quite often, and that's not helping us at all. More specifically, getting to the idea of where does coding fit into the curriculum. I mean, do primary and lower secondary school students really benefit from this disjointed daily circuit of specialist teachers rolling in for a single 30-minute lesson? You know, we can get right down the lower end of primary school, down to grade 2, grade 3. We've got specialist teachers rolling up to offer their font of knowledge from the front, and the children get 30 minutes of it, then they get 30 minutes of something else. They're nowhere near the logical reasoning. They're nowhere near that kind of experience that all three speakers have been asking for. You know, this new literacy, this idea of thinking logically, articulating in a new kind of language, whether it's an algorithmic problem-solving activity, you know, or not. Whatever it is, they aren't near this idea of inquiry because the chunks of their lessons don't facilitate that. We're just waiting for the next teacher to roll up with a new set of books or a new set of slides on their PowerPoint presentations. We haven't got there. And finally on this slide, does the frequent round of formal tests and examinations really help anybody? Are they rather more about accountability? I'm amazed actually in Indian curriculum schools how many children score above 96%. We have thousands of children in the school and we look at the score sheets from their curriculum tests and there's no one below 95% on the tests. I mean, I spend my life saying, well, whoever devised the test didn't know much about a normal curve of distribution. But we've got ourselves locked into this pattern. And of course, the big players in industry don't want us to leave it. There's a huge industry in textbooks. There's a huge industry in examinations and tests. And there's a huge industry in accountability in school inspection, for example. In most countries, it's outsourced. I know India doesn't have a national system, but in places like the UK and across the Middle East, it's all privatized. People just keep going because they get their pay from turning up and writing the same recommendations that they wrote for the last 10 years in the reports. And I can prove that to you by just going online in the UAE, in Dubai in particular. I was a part of it for a short time, so I know this story from the inside only too well. So where are we going with this final slide? I've got one more slide to bore you with. Here we are, computer science in the curriculum, in teaching, in a learning context. The World Economic Forum have identified 10 top skills that we'll need by 2025. And here are just 3 of them that all 3 of our previous speakers have alluded to. The first one, analytical thinking and innovation. I mean, computer science is all about logical reasoning, and therefore it should be, in my view, in learning from a very early age, and it is already in good schools because we see 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-old children sorting and grouping. We see them sorting out not really a Venn diagram, but they've got hoops and rings and rubbers and ropes, and they're sorting things out on different criteria to put into different parts of their playful Venn diagrams. So they're doing it. They're sequencing. They're looking at number counts. They're looking at 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, going backwards, going forwards, looping, going around in circles, looking for things that have patterns in a loop. These are binary choices quite often. It's absolutely the heart and soul of things like Python and Scratch, you know, whichever program you want to choose. These are fundamental core skills that belong in there. So therefore, I would argue we are teaching it already. And the last thing we want is a subject added to the curriculum, the core curriculum that 97% of us want. But the last thing we want is it to be under the title of computer science or programming. It should be there in our thinking and in every subject. I think Dr. Sahar opened up by saying it should be in every subject. It should be there as a part of our logical reasoning, or analytical thinking. And here we have the World Economic Forum telling us something we already know, typical of the big international agencies. They're very good at that. So is the OECD. What's the second one I've chosen for you from the 10? Technology design, use, control, and programming. A beautiful invitation to bring in coding in a new context and at home. And the last but not least, the calls for 21st century skills from the OEDC, from UNESCO working papers. In fact, these papers have been referred to in the CBSC training for pedagogical leadership. Creativity, originality, and initiative. We need to be looking at the curriculum with a different layer of classification and not just piling more and more things into it under that old-fashioned subject timetable mode. I think I've picked up on what most people have said during their 15-minute presentations. I think STEAM helps. That's an initiative that is helping to break down these traditional barriers. Yeah, I mean, and Mr. Roshan was talking about, you know, the vocational skills. We've got too much desire to get into a 3-year university course. We can get an awful lot of vocational training through in very different models, and the time has come for that. And I think we need to mobilize the savvy youth that we now have at the top end of our education systems and use some of their thinking to change what we have become absolutely seduced into believing cannot be changed. So thank you. And thank you to my colleagues on the panel earlier.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing your insights into the practical aspects of a classroom. I mean, when we talk about pedagogy, the philosophy, and when the marketing companies make their marketing advertisements, I think none of them really care about what practically happens inside the classroom. For that, you have to be inside the classroom, and it comes with its own challenges. And I also, greatly agree with you on that point. The curriculum being, what they call as a mile wide and inch deep. We need to move away from more depth, learning fewer things and learning those things in a much deeper fashion. Yeah, thank you all panelists for sharing your views on this. We are now open for Q&A. You can share your questions in the Q&A option right at the bottom of the webinar screen. While you post your questions, just curious, I am just trying to rerun that poll again. Should coding be a part of the core curriculum? Now, of course, we have a much broader definition of coding as well. It's not necessarily, taking a computer and typing in the code, but it's also, creating the necessary skills even through unplugged activities like, Dr. Maria, everyone, all the speakers, spoke about having unplugged activities activities such as even sorting or grouping things or sequencing through loops, which can be started from an younger age as well. So here it is. So yeah, the poll is in front of you. So you have a minute to answer.
The question's wrong though.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, once we redefine the definitions, then Chris and I are much more on the same page, I think.
absolutely.
I think that's absolutely right. Absolutely right.
I mean, we should run a different poll on what coding is. What does it mean? Coding should be a part of curriculum. Yeah. All right, so we end the poll, and of course, the no percentages come up from 3% to 11%. I'm sure some of the participants has a newer perspective. So, yeah. Right. So I would like to run one more small poll on. Do you think the inclusion of coding as a separate subject does it overload the existing curriculum? Again, you have a minute to answer the poll.
Yes.
We'll need to look into multiple choice assessment design here.
I think you're right.
The partly option, I think.
Yeah. All right. So we have 18% who thinks it overloads. It's slightly controversial to the first poll, where the participant would like to have coding as a part of core curriculum, but still 18% thinks it overloads, and 46% thinks it's partly overloads, and 36% in full favor of having coding without overloading the existing curriculum. All right. Thank you, everyone, for participating in the poll. Now we will move on to the questions. Yeah. So, so one of the questions, the first question, logical thinking is what we need to be proficient in coding. How can we track that in students? How can we track progress of logical thinking in students? Teachers themselves are not capable of making a rubric to evaluate students' progress. So, yeah. Chris, would you like to address this?
Just give me again, Paul. I'm sorry, I didn't pick it all up.
Yeah, so logical thinking is the key skill to be proficient in coding. How can we track the progress on logical thinking skills in students, considering teachers themselves are not capable of making a rubric to evaluate student progress? So how do we keep track of the skills, like logical thinking? Yeah.
I mean, I think that goes straight to how skilled are our teachers in actually assessing things which aren't just simply numerical counts against a test paper. It's a question there about tracking progress at higher level thinking. And a lot of teachers do this very, very well. I don't want to criticize the teaching profession in its entirety, but we've reduced so much of the work to simple response. I mean, rather like your questionnaire. Your questionnaire didn't really get to the heart of the matter of anything, for the reasons that Roshan said. We're voting for things where we have different understandings of the terms, the actual context of the questions. So I was throwing in my vote to be cooperative, but that kind of activity actually stops real assessment from happening. It's rather like I was saying about the very high scores. You know, the parental population doesn't want their child to get below 95%. So we play that game. We give everybody a very high score, so it looks like they're doing wonderfully well. But we all know perfectly well there's a normal distribution curve, which will mean there's a vast difference between the performance of the most able to the less able. And yet we don't want to actually expose that because we don't have the confidence to handle it socially. I think it's the same with inquiry. You know, we've got teachers who are fearful that if they don't say that their children are doing well, they're going to be criticized in the systems of accountability that we have. So my view would be we need to be much more open and honest about what we're doing across the population in our schools. And it can be done with the warmest and the most developmental attitudes. It needn't be harsh, you know, you're in the top group and you're in the bottom group. It can be the most supportive and cooperative way. And that's achieved in many schools where the skills of assessment are regarded as high priority for the teacher's training. And when I talk about the skills of assessment, I am meaning things like assessing inquiry, exploration, innovation, taking a risk. You know, you've got the wrong answer, but the way you tackle the problem solving was terrific. You know, that isn't really in the culture of assessment in many schools, and it should be. Rambled around a bit, I'm sorry, but there we go.
All right. Roshan, would you like to add anything on top of it?
I completely agree. I mean, this question is sort of asking a wider question. Whenever you introduce anything new or anything different, you know, there's always a question of, are the teachers currently equipped with the skills they need to deliver that? You know, and if they're not, then, you know, that's a whole separate, we could have a whole separate webinar on teacher training and how to support teachers to apply new teaching skills. In this case, you know, new methods of assessment. How can they understand rubric-based assessment? How can they assess a wider set of skills than, as Chris said, you know, numbers on a sheet of paper? So nothing more to add. Yeah.
All right. So another question for many students who are not good at devices or programming, adding coding might be a stressful experience for students. So what's your perspective on, you know, coding adding more stress to students? Dr. Maria and Dr. Biswajit, if you could, you know, you're on mute, Dr. Maria. Yeah.
You're on mute.
Yeah.
Well, I tend to disagree with that. There will be always a bit of a stress on everything. Whenever there is a new learning, there is always a stress, because if there is no stress, then a person doesn't learn, you know, because nothing comes free in the world. And especially when you learn something, you need to always suspend and, you know, you have to work out your brain. But having said that, technology has come easy to this generation. That is a whole lot difference from an adult and this generation. This generation is so quick with mobile as well as with computer, and they pick up things much faster than most of the adults have done, you know, in our younger age. So it is, I don't know if it is a gift or it's a talent or it's something that comes in the DNA. I don't know how to explain, but you find most of the children, whether they come from a poorer area or from a village, or you take a, you know, an cross-section view of the society, nobody is exempt from this. Nobody is exempt from this. Not only children from well-to-do school, but also children from the ordinary school. I have seen in Mumbai slums how the children were able to do with this Khan Academy classes, you know, with the iPad that they had. They were so quick. They were able to do maths so fast. So that would be my answer, that it won't be a huge stress, but a little stress would be there. Little stress would be there, but it is good. It is good for the children to learn at an early age. For the first question that they had raised, we often presume that the teachers wouldn't come up to this level. The teachers wouldn't rise up, you know, but that is not the way we need to look at, you know. The teachers are teachers, you know.
they have come to that level not because of lack of knowledge or anything. Probably a new technology or a new course like this, when it comes, you do not expect automatically the teacher to be an expert at it. We need to give the chance to the teachers to learn and also to be able to cope with it. I think that side by side, parallelly, this type of a training also should go in when we are introducing new courses. New education policy, giving in progressive things inside, has to take care of training the teachers equally. This is going to be a huge responsibility on every front. And the teachers are the ones who are going to take this forward. And we need to spend both by way of money as well as resources, time, everything in making these teachers really good. That is my personal opinion.
Right. Yeah. Dr. Saha, would you like to add anything here?
No, I think most of the points are really discussed, and it is really a learning experience for me also, especially Roshan, Krish, and Dr. Maria. I think absolutely fine, and without seeing the age appropriateness is definitely is a key point, and as we have to do it. It is not excluding something or including something. The new form of curriculum drives and inclusions, and especially this coding, immersive experience. These are now part of and parcel of the curriculum delivery model. And this transformative model, unless teachers are energized, that is not possible. At the same time, parents are really ready, but again, somewhere I think mindset issues need to be addressed together. So teachers, parents, and students, over enthusiastic students, balancing them also, it's sometimes it's needed. And also that zeal for learning, how we can really motivate them, so that out of them a good coders are also developed. It is not that always the typical narratives of managing a big organizations, but at the same time, good coders are also very much essential to survive these IT industries, the boom, whatever. Because if I recall these present days government initiative, especially if, of course, it is not within this track to discuss, but IT related track, income tax portals glitches, we are well aware of. I think we need this kind of innovation. So on the other day, I was reading in the newspaper, somebody from Bihar has already identified some bug in eminent service provider platform. So these are seen at micro level. I think if we take this coding as a part of the curriculum, as a part of holistic delivery model, then more and more perspectives we can create, and more examples we can showcase, and ultimately by means of international hackathon, because these days really company needs good problem solver, and I think our students would be the best one, and moreover internationally also there are many countries where ranking wise in coding, I think till now we are far below the international benchmarking, but I think to upgrade that in the education systems, massive drive and collective efforts is required. So that much I can say.
Dr. Saab, before I lose you, one quick question. So from one of the participants. So now that NEP has made coding as a mandatory subject from grade 6, and many of the participants and panelists sort of put it as low as 4 years. So in what age should it be compulsory? When should it get once you build the basic coding capacity in children, till what age should coding be compulsory? When should they can have a freedom, not to pursue coding anymore, they want to pursue arts, or what is that upper age? We are talking about.
It's a very difficult to answer this question, because many of our schools, in fact, Roshan is very much here. And what about his school's age group? At which age groups they introduce the IT, ICT curriculums or so-called, may not be in the coding package, but other way, many of our capable schools are offering as early as possible. It may be class 3, even sometimes class 1, but mostly average, if we keep this notion, from class 6, CBSE officially introduced coding as a curriculum.
Yeah.
So, but before that, IT orientations and other things as a part of Scratch and all, these things are very much available. And there are a lot of free open source platform based on which we can create the discussions, and IT teachers on their own also, they can introduce so many new jargon in the classroom. It may not be, if we look into Korea, so they are structured curriculum in coding, and they have in fact made some schools dedicated for this kind of structural approach. It is not for all. It is not quite common. So maybe some schools, maybe a cluster, or maybe in perspectives, many way. So age appropriate, this is entirely in the hand of the teacher. So whatever, because whatever appropriate age they feel on ground, a certain prescriptive approach, many a times it may fail.
And
so suggestive approach in the real-time situation is be more ethical.
Yeah, Dr. Saha, the question is, what's the upper age, after which, children can decide not to pursue coding as a subject?
Okay. So see, our domain is up to 10+2.
Till there it's mandatory. Yeah. Okay.
So many students in engineering, even these days, they start coding, thinking of coding after 10+2. So by the times they're out from our system. So if I put this kind of comment, it will create definitely it will create a controversy.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Saha. This question, I think it's particularly for Mr. Roshan. And I could connect it with quite well as a parent as well. It was about, that form of fear of missing out as a parent, child's. So we know currently, not to name any particular company though, but we know the marketing stuff like, at the age of 6, your child becomes an entrepreneur, an app development company owner, or at the age of 13, get a 15 crore rupee job, sort of. So how do we manage the parent expectations, as a teacher, as a school, the demand from the parents? How do you find a fine balance between what's practical in the class and the parent expectations?
Well, first of all, why are parents getting these expectations? How are they so susceptible to the fear? I think there's a traditional mindset where there's always been a scarcity of good jobs in this country. And that continues to be the case. So to some extent, it's perhaps understandable if coding is becoming the new. It used to be that every parent wanted to make their child an engineer, and many still do. And we have a massive surplus of underqualified engineers being churned out of the universities every year. Coding might become the new engineering from that perspective. That it's satisfying a fear. So I think there's a duty of care at multiple levels to prevent that. There's the basic policy level. There's talk now. I think the education minister announced in late December about introducing regulation on the edtech sector. Now, whether that's advisable or not is debatable. I think what needs to be regulated is not specifically what they're doing as edtech, but false advertising ought generally to be regulated by sort of, financial regulatory authorities. So I think that comes under the scope of illegal advertising already. It doesn't require new policy as such, but it needs to, it needs to be enforced, and that financial regulation needs to apply in the context of the new wave of companies which are in the tech sphere. So I think, that will solve part of the problem. And similarly, there needs to be a wider structural improvement in the quality of education that's producing kids who have the skills to thrive in any job market. So it goes back to the original point. that, you know, we've got a changing world. We've got a lot of fear about change. We've got a lot of technology coming up that people understand to varying degrees. And we need to empower, you know, at the policy level, you know, to make sure that false advertising doesn't happen, at the structural level, at the educational level, to make sure that skills are imparted to children so that they can thrive with transferable skills, so that they can focus on the skills that are essentially human, because technology will replace all those skills that are not human. And that's what's going to hold the kids in good stead. So, and once we've got a feeling that, you know, amongst the parents that kids are being prepared to thrive in a future job market, then that cause for fear will be reduced somewhat. So that cause of fearfully, you know, shelling out huge sums of money to put their children through these coding courses of questionable efficacy will reduce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Dr. Maria, would you like to add anything on this parents' perspective?
Yes. Yes, this type of expectation, especially pressure from the parents, what they feel is true. It's true. And we need to take them on board too, because initially this would cause a lot of tension. And I also believe that the children need not be put into such a huge pressure, but rather learning should be fun related at an early age. And they must be able to relate to it and enjoy learning. And that is why an equal amount of, let us say, opportunities must be given to the children to have a little adventure with the nature, you know, taking them, and also to have a little bit of relational skills built up. All these should be balanced, in my opinion, because you're forcing only computer type of a thing onto the children again and again, saying that there's a huge market and that they will learn to learn and they will become entrepreneurs soon. It's also a pressure. Certainly, I wouldn't advise that. But I would certainly opt for coding at whatever age appropriate. As someone said, let's leave it to the school as well as the parent on the spot, Dr. Biswaji said. I think I may go with this because they will be able to judge whether in a rural area or whether in a very developed city, they can choose appropriate age. But certainly it can be a part of learning. Yeah. A very beautiful way of learning small things. They can prepare poetry, they can prepare dramas, they can prepare on how to create social awareness, and they can become socially conscious, teach children. You know, a lot of things can happen through coding. So let's take it as a type of a fun and not too much of a pressure. That's what I would be telling the parents.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Saha. And I think since we are running short of time, I'll take one last question. Should coding only be available for intelligent students, or is it for everyone? Should it be an optional subject for highly able children, or should it be optional? I'm open, you know, any of the panelists can take it up.
Yeah. May I take it?
Yep.
The issue is about differentiation. You know, it's about recognizing that people have a range of skills in a range of areas. You know, going back to the previous question about parental awareness, I mean, parents need to see, I mean, wherever you are in the world, and India has such a wide cross-section of social circumstance across its population. But these days, in this new world, soft skills that Dr. Maria Charles mentioned earlier, you know, quite firmly, soft skills are employable skills. You know, you get a job these days in most parts of the world if you've got well-developed soft skills. You don't need a PhD in maths unless you're working for NASA or some other very high-tech industrial organization. And that would be for the very able students to perhaps get into the, you know, the physics of space travel or whatever. But in terms of the general population, soft skills are becoming a much more important dimension than the things that we have traditionally regarded as getting a decent qualification in. So I think in terms of, you know, it's about recognizing the need for differentiation. It's about giving people a handle on what really matters now in this new world. I think Dr. Roshan just said that it's transferable skills. The human skills will be all that's left because the computers will be taking over all the hard stuff for us, like driving our cars. You know, you needn't actually learn to drive anymore. The cars will drive themselves if you so wish. Although the bureaucrats still make you go through endless form filling in to make sure you've got insurance and an updated driving license and all the rest of it. Our social structures aren't keeping pace with where we are in terms of our development. And I think the ethical shift is very significant post-COVID. People have seen the world differently, having been locked down for 2 years. And there are a different set of human values coming into that. And not sure whether I've answered the question or not there, but I think I started off on the point about differentiation. We should be giving everybody everything and then letting the differentiation of the program determine what people actually experience at home and at school. It should be a combined operation.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris. We are really running short of time. I would give all the panelists maybe to conclude your thoughts in one statement, if all of you could, starting Dr. Sahu, if you could conclude your thoughts as a final statement.
Yes. So, as it is final statement, coding or any kind of emerging areas of technology, it is not going to end somewhere. Every time some rewinding or different kind of mechanisms will evolve. And just only one sentence, we should be ready to embrace change. That's all. And through that, everything is possible.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Dr. Maria?
I would reiterate that. And I would say, adding to the last question that was there, there is this intelligence has to be defined, And I think probably skills like this is meant for everyone. So it is not just meant for a certain skills, meant for very intelligent. Who is an intelligent boy? Who scores high marks? No, probably he may not be the successful one at the end, So we would need to look into offering skills that are meant for everyone. So that's how we need to see coding. And coding also, that's why we need to introduce many other sciences to coding. Otherwise, coding by itself may not have a huge meaning. But when it is integrated with other sciences, other skills, probably it will pay a lot of dividends. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Maria. Mr. Roshan?
Yeah, teach kids computational thinking, teach kids logical reasoning, and teach them basic human transferable skills. And that'll enable them to go ahead and learn coding or literally anything else and thrive in a future job market, whatever that may look like.
Thank you, Roshan. Chris?
Yeah, I go along with what you said, I think, totally. It is about logical reasoning. We have coding in the curriculum already from a very young age. It's just not parceled that way. And I think when we're talking about policy at a national level or an international level even, we should be asking the traditional subject associations, people like the Mathematical Association and the English Association and the scientific groups that design the science curriculum, to examine how they can loosen some of the traditional lines that they have introduced into their subject areas, to include some of the things that we've been talking about, like transferable skills. I mean, the word we haven't mentioned, which is everywhere, is critical thinking. I think every inspection framework in the world that I've bumped into, it talks about children being helped to think critically. And I mean, that seems to be at the heart of logical reasoning and at the heart of programming and computer science. So I think there's an obligation, I think, on the subject associations to actually give themselves a shake and start to look at how they can actually develop as a bit more creatively. STEAM, we've mentioned a few times between us, and it's a periphery, isn't it? We carry on with maths and science and English ad nauseum, and then some bright spark does a little STEAM project, and we all go yippee. We'll have an exhibition on STEAM in the big hall. We'll demonstrate all our projects. It's time it moved a little bit more into the mainstream of those curriculum compartments, I think it would be a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts. I think from today's webinar, I think we have a much broader and much wholesome definition of what coding is. One thing every panelist agreed is we definitely have to develop those computational thinking skills, which is logical reasoning, problem solving, critical thinking as a part of your curriculum. Now, how do you want to do it? Is it through an unplugged activity by sorting materials or sequencing steps, or finding loops and patterns in nature, or whether you want to introduce that using a dedicated programming language or coding? I think this discretion has to be more school specific. What age we want to start it across, that should based on the school's discretion and the teacher's decision how and when it should be introduced. But one thing, a key point I think I would like to drive through is whatever we do, we should make it much deeper rather than making it mile wide, trying to include a lot more things and not trying to cover anything deeper, but focus on the key skills and go much deeper into it. And I would like to conclude with Dr. Saha's statement. It's about preparing our children for change, and for preparing our children for change, we need to embrace the change first, as educators and teachers and policymakers. So thank you everyone for joining this webinar. On behalf of Yardstick and all the panelists, I thank everyone. We could not answer all the questions in the Q&A, but we will try and answer them or an email following this. Yeah, thank you once again. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.